Business News is on the hour with Ini John Nakwa.
Thank you so much, Chamberlain. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Business Morning on Sunrise Daily. And as usual, we started from the global space. Oil prices ticked up in Asian trade on Monday, extending gains from last week when prices rose nearly 4% on the view that supply was tightening, with the risks heightened by further attacks on Russian energy infrastructure. Looking at the numbers right there, we see that for Brent, it's now up to $85.66. We left this at 83 on Friday. It went up 0.4%. For WTI from the United States, it crossed over to $81. We see right there at $81.44 a barrel, gain 0.5%. Now let's look at the factors. On Saturday, a strike sparked a brief fire at the Salvansk refinery in Krasnodar, which processes about 8.5 million metric tons of crude oil a year. That's about 170,000 barrels a day. Analysis found that attacks have idled around 7%. Oh, that's in Russia. So that makes it about 7% of Russian refining capacity that has been idled in the first quarter of this year. The refining complexes process and export crude varieties to several markets, including China and India. In the Middle East, also, we still have problems coming from there. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed that he will proceed with plans to push into Gaza's Rafah enclave, where more than 1 million displaced people are sheltering, defying pressure from Israel's allies. This week, investors are also looking at outcome of the U.S. Federal Reserve's two-day meeting. You remember inflation came up. That's going to help them decide what to do, but we're expecting cuts to start from June, and that will bring more clarity on the timing of interest rate for the week. That's what we'll be looking at this week, and these are the factors driving prices this week. Let's move over to the grain space now. Chicago wheat futures rose on Monday for the first time in 4 sessions, recovering from last week's losses as Russian attacks on Ukraine's agricultural infrastructure over the weekend supported prices. Let's see the prices. Wheat, the most active, is on CBOT, Chicago Board of Trade. It gains 0.9%. That's a whole lot, for a one-session gain, to $5.33 for a quarter of a bushel. And the contracts fell last week 1.7% to trade near its weakest level in 3.5 years. If we see other prices right there, soybeans, it firmed 0.2% to $12.01 a bushel. And corn also, on the other hand, also gained 0.6% to $4.39 for a quarter of a bushel. Now, the factors driving all of this: Russian air attacks damage agricultural enterprises. So we see 2 major facilities being damaged now in the war and the regional tension going on, agriculture and oil. And these are the 2 major drivers of economic activities. The Black Sea ports of Odyssey, that was in Ukraine. Russia did that to Ukraine. In the other one, we saw Ukraine doing that to Russia. Most of Ukraine's regions have started 2024 spring sowing, seeding the 128,100 hectares of spring wheat, peas, and barley and oats. Last month, the country's agriculture ministry said that the farmers were expected to reduce the area sown with corn by 9% year on year. Now, U.S. wheat is facing intense competition from heavy flow of Russian supplies. Cheap wheat still coming from Russia there. That's prompted Chinese buyers to cancel. We did tell you that last week, some of the deals to buy U.S. and Australian cargoes. The U.S. Department of Agriculture recently confirmed in its daily reporting system that exporters reported cancellations of more than 500,000 tons of U.S. wheat that was supposed to be sold to China. Now we come back home to Nigeria there, and I know your internet is back, maybe working partially, but not fully back, and so the risks are still there. Main one, a digital framework service provider, declared a force majeure on Friday, and they've explained steps that they are taking to restore internet connection to service. They said in a statement that on its website that it became necessary to declare that force majeure after that testing. We all experienced that not just in Nigeria, South Africa experienced in Ghana and some other African countries. Now, also remember that the Nigerian Communication Commission, the NCC, has said damage affects major undersea cables near Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire, and it's causing downtime across West and Southern African countries. It said that it caused somewhere in Côte d'Ivoire and Senegal. And main one, I said this might take about 3 weeks to fix, so we have to endure. Well, thank God at least we have partial service. That's why we're still able to do some of the things that we do. But they're working on it. They assure us, main one, assuring that to customers. Now to our, well, evergreen story back at the issue of FX. The central bank has another, well, I would like to say another policy coming up there. They said the central bank has asked all deposit banks to submit their retail demands for Forex in accordance to a set out format and template. They actually share that format and template with the banks. The regulator is emphasizing the need that FX demand be related to trades that are due for payment and duly registered. These should be submitted on time to the Director of Financial Markets of the CBN. And so this is another effort by the CBN to check, you know, that there are no fictitious demands of FX to put unnecessary demand or pressure on the policy that's going on the value of Naira and all of that. So this is another one which we hope if banks would follow through and only genuine demands are being attended to, perhaps that will reduce the demand for dollars in the country and reduce the pressure that we see in that space. Now, on Friday, we did see the inflation numbers for February 2024. We saw headline inflation increase to 31.70 relative to January 2024. Headline inflation was at 29.90. Let's look at those numbers and understand the impact of it if we could have those inflation numbers. So we saw headline inflation. There you have it at 31.7 for February from 29.30, and that's up 1.80 month on month. And then when we look at year on year, February this time, we had inflation at 21.91%. So year on year, you're looking at 9.79%. January 2023, it was at 21.82. Meanwhile, January 2023, it was 29.0. January 2024, we had 29.90. For 2023, it was 21.82. Now, just note the difference. Year on year here, you're looking at more than 7% added, while for February, we're looking at 9.79. So prices have increased. Price of that bag of gari, of rice, has gone up about 9.79, even though that's questionable, because when last did the baskets of inflation commodities, when last was it updated? In the UK, it's updated every month. In Nigeria, we cannot remember when last we did that. That's a conversation coming up. And then when we look at food inflation, which is the major driver of inflation in Nigeria, in February 2024, it's gone up to 37.92%. In January, it was 29.90. I think it's getting worse or what? So we see it there. Now, year on year, between February 2024 and February 2023, it's gone up 13.57%. And we see a lot of effort from the government there. We see grains of bags being given and all of that. But we still see this much movement year on year. Meanwhile, month on month, we see it there, more than almost 2%. Let's speak to Professor Ken Ife, joins us from Abuja studio now. He's a development economist and public policy strategist. Professor Ken, good morning. So we look at the numbers, and we saw year on year, food inflation has gone up more than 13%. That's a whole lot. No wonder we are feeling the squeeze, and yet there's the opinion that this is not even capturing the real thing, because our basket has not been updated for many, many years.
Right. It's not a good news. It's not a good news at all. And if you look at the relationship between the figures, month on month, and also year on year, you see a significant shift. For example, if you look at the month on month for headline inflation, and then look at the year, you saw about, it's about 7%, or 10, no, nearly 10%. But when you look at 9.70%, but if you look at the same situation for food, it's about 13%. It's a lot more. The jump is quite significant. And then if you look at the food, also month on month, again from 29 is quite heavy. You look at that, it's about 8%. So that has a lot of implications for however we think we are going to tackle this inflation. And I have to tell you something. There are 4 major things to look at when you start unpacking all these figures. Of course, I know we can come back and look at measures that we can take, but we need to understand the 4 different things at play. One is if we have demand pull inflation, domestic demand pull inflation, if we have domestic demand pull inflation, then, which is not the case, then the monetary policy will deal with that, because you can suppress that demand by hiking the rates, the MPR rates, the policy rates, and then all other rates. But that doesn't seem to be the case. What we have is more of a structural supply push inflation. Now, this you can see manifesting itself in various prices of inputs going up, the petrol, the diesel, and all of that, and the power, energy. So these things are only amenable to fiscal policy, not to monetary policy. Then number 3, if we have imported inflation, which is arising from an import-dependent economy, and there's an inflation pass-through straight to the consumer because there's no price regulation mechanism, then monetary policy can affect that by moderating the interest with the exchange rates, so that the rates at which these things are purchased and brought in is attenuated by manipulating the forex rates to that extent. But remember that when you look at the difference between food inflation sub-index and headline inflation, even though there's a distance, substantial distance of our 7%, there is a component that is common to 2 of them, which is imported processed food. Processed food is in both of them. So if you want to take them out, you have to look at how monetary policy can affect exchange rate. Then we'll move to the 4th one. The 4th one is domestic demand pull inflation, which we said is not the case. But there is a foreign cost demand pull inflation, which is caused by, and I want you to listen carefully to this, this is caused by the 100 million Francophone citizens surrounding Nigeria that are importing because of the price differential. They have a low interest inflation rate of about 2% on the average. They have a constant currency price fixed because they are linked to euro. And the French government is burning 80% of their reserves to maintain that value of that currency. It's an artificial value. And that's been going on for over 10 years. You have them fixed. Now, what it means is that about 9 years ago, 8 years ago, 1 naira was buying 3 francs CFA, which is fixed. Today, because of our devaluations and all of that, we can only buy 0.8, 0.7, 0.8. We can't even buy 1 CFA. So if you're looking at them getting our food from our country, our money is devalued about 80%. So there's a demand pool because it is very cheap now, very cheap export from Nigeria of our primary produce. But can monetary policy help there? It can. They are not bringing in dollar. They are not paying that food for dollar. They are using Nigerian naira, which is where the problem lies. Two, we need to, if we begin to ask maybe what can we do, then you can't stop that because of ECOWAS treaty, but you can insist that documentation is raised on those primary goods going out, and you can insist that they should be paid in dollar so that you can have it show up our dollar supply. But other than that, the major strategy that you should use is value addition. If we have value addition at the frontiers, then they are obliged to pay tax. Because if they say they don't want to pay tax, then they have to register with ECOWAS Trade Liberation Scheme, which is ETLS. That is what will give them that exemption, and they have to prove rules of origin. We have to comply with rule of origin. So that is another complex, but it is very helpful for us because if we add value, which you can do, one simplest way of doing that is to get the marketing board to be mopping up all the produce and then now control where that produce is sent. You can now send that to the processors who will process. If you leave it to the farmers, they won't be able to, they'll take away, all these will go away because traders are going to come to them and collect all this and they move them across the border. So we'll monitor with fiscal policy, it's only fiscal policy that can help there. Will monetary policy help on that side? It's difficult, very, very difficult.
Prof,
and that's why food supply sub-index remains at very, very high level.
So, Prof, I guess that is why last week we did see the CBN do some kind of intervention, even after the governor showed a huge determination that he was not going to get into the intervention space because of the harm it may have caused to the economy before now. But we did see the CBN give some, I think they gave some grains and then they gave fertilizer, beg your pardon, and some money and all of that, because if they are to hit that target, since the CBN is using inflation target now of 21.4% this year, there's no way the monetary policy alone can bring that to pass.
Well, controlling money supply is essential. I haven't said anything wrong with that. It is essential because in the end of the day, the capacity of people to buy is what you are going to control with money supply. So that has effect. It's going to have effect without a doubt. And then also remember, if you add value to the produce, it actually helps you to moderate the imported materials, the imported food, because you are now bringing a substitute to enable you to enforce restriction on imported food. But if you don't have the substitute, you can't stop people from smuggling the food. They'll be smuggling them into the country. So we cannot escape adding value because it is a strategy that helps us to deal with the cross-border challenge. Because once you process, then the cross-border trade will go up and start demanding dollar and start inflicting taxes and then do restrictions. All of that can happen at the level of value addition. And then if you come to our external import, obviously, when you have a substitute product, then the policy will be very effective in making sure that you can cut back on imported food. Because that imported processed food goes not only on the food sub-basket index, but even at the core inflation level. It is in there, in the core inflation. And if you look at the core inflation, which is coming in at 25.13%, it tells you that the first step is to move from, if you wanted to actually bring the whole inflation down, you have to look at how quickly you are going to bring down 37.something%, which is the inflated food sub-basket index, bringing it down to 25, which is the core. Because here, the core inflation excludes those volatile items, which is food and the energy costs. Those are the two most volatile. So assuming that you are able to control all that, you'll be targeting 25.13%, which is the core inflation. So, right. And then when you now hit the core inflation, you are now going to say, okay, how about rural inflation? Let's target that. So, we've got some work to do. It's not impossible, but we've got some work to do.
All right, Professor Kenefe, development economist and public policy strategist, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning.
Thank you.
So in spite of this, we still see the private sector, surviving, one would say. What lessons can the private sector share with the public sector in dealing with the economy? One of it, Insecurity, another of it, feeding, of course, into one another. Well, let's speak on developmental leadership, lessons from the private sector now with the academic director and Chief Executive Officer of Africa Program at Lagos Business School, Mr. Patrick Akinwuta. Mr. Akinwuta, good morning, and thank you so much for your time.
Good morning.
So we know that you're having a summit coming up of chief financial officers coming up. But first of all, what can you share with us? Perhaps the public sector is missing, which it seems the private sector, but in spite of the headwinds, we see the private sector, we still have banks declaring profits. We still have the oil companies having windfalls and all of that. Perhaps there are some lessons which the public sector can learn from handling of business and enterprises by the private sector.
Thank you very much. We know that the public sector has certain critical roles. Rule of law, providing a level playing ground for businesses to thrive, security, fundamental rights for the citizenry. I think the real lesson that the public sector can learn from the private sector is how it conducts its business. In the private sector, there are certain fundamentals. Efficiency is the rule of the game. And when we talk of efficiency, we are talking of the relationship between input and output. How do you produce more from the same set of inputs, or how do you produce more from less input? What you've seen in the results of the private sector is a fundamental focus on the basics. What is the input? What is the output equation? You add that to transparency in reporting. So when you look at each of these institutions, they don't just come at the end of a year and present a budget and then go to sleep. At the end of the year, come and say, this is the outcome. They provide monthly. First, they provide guidance. They provide monthly, quarterly, half-yearly, 9 months before end-of-year results. And they do it in a transparent manner. They bring in the stakeholders to challenge them, to compare them to other entities. So the pressure is on. The ownership level is high. The accountability index is very high. And this is what we need to do as a nation. When you look at the public sector, what we talk about and what we're engrossed mainly about as a nation is the annual budget. So everyone is talking about the input. How much will we share? How much is allocated to A or B? But very little attention is paid to the output part. So when we talk of agriculture, we talk of what is the budget for agriculture. But Professor Adesina, a former minister of Agri, now president of AFDB, has demonstrated that the output part of the equation is very fundamental. How much tons of cassava are we producing? How much was it last year? How much are we spending on inputs? What will it be this year? What is our volume of manufacturing of key household items that are used in Nigeria? What is the input factor? What is the output factor? As a nation, we need to start asking, if you budget for roads, how many kilometers of roads was actually produced? If we do the arithmetic of the cost per kilometer of the resurfacing of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, we will understand the colossal inefficiency that as a nation we unleashed on ourselves. For more than 24 years, we were budgeting and budgeting for a 130-kilometer road. Thank God it's been done now, but what's the efficiency index with that? So this is a fundamental area that the public sector can learn from the practice of the private sector.
This to the FX issue, because I mean we've seen the CBN roll out statements and policies and adjustments over and over. Perhaps there's something we can also learn for that area too. That's the FX supply challenge.
Well, thank you. first, I think we must commend the central bank and the government for the bold removal of the arbitrage window between the official foreign exchange market and the hitherto parallel market. That was a bold move. It was painful, but it's the right thing to do. I mean, if you want to solve toothache or a tooth decay, you don't rub mentholatum. You have to go extract it from the source if you want to get out of that pain. So, but having done that, the point to do is to look at is how do we drive productivity? Historically, we've looked at foreign exchange from managing demand. How do you allocate effects? But the real challenge for us as a developing economy is how do we drive productivity? And to do that, we need to get better with our infrastructure. We need to focus on power. We need to ensure that there is security so that people can go about their business effectively, drive exports, and minimize import. That's what drives the exchange rate. So it's not our job to start managing what the exchange rate will be simply by monetary policies. The underlying fundamental needs to be squared. Output must exceed input. Export must exceed import. To do that, we need a productive economy. We need to create jobs. That will be possible when we invest in infrastructure, when we invest heavily in supporting agriculture, provide power. And I must comment recently, the focus of state and federal government on rail is the right focus. What we need to do is to do it in an efficient manner. You saw what we did with GSM licensing in Nigeria. We can as well put the rail infrastructure problem into a licensing model. Move the railway ministry into a railway services commission like NCC, invite bids globally, let them pay huge value. We have over 1 million square kilometers as land mass in Nigeria, but we have only 3,500 kilometers of rail. That's a poor relationship. So the focus on rail is right, but we need to do it right. And this is why the Lagos Business School, we are focused on building responsible leaders that will inspire Africa's growth. And that's why we're driving the development of leaders in Nigeria to bring in the practice of the private sector into national consciousness. And that's what we're doing in the CFO Leadership Summit, which we hold on Wednesday, and is meant to bring CFOs and CEOs together such that we understand the strategic collaboration and synergy that they can unleash to develop our economy in a fundamental manner and take our rightful place in Africa as the leading economy.
But when we get these people empowered in the private sector, the thing is, do we get them to the public sector, or do we transfer the knowledge to the individuals in the public sector?
You're speaking to the public-private partnership. I mean, great economies have a proper synergy between the academia, the private sector, and the public sector. And we're doing that at the Lagos Business School. You did at the introduction, you talked of the Global CEO Program. What we're trying to do is to develop leaders that have a broader horizon, understand the public sector input, understand the social input in a continent as Africa, understand the developments and the leverages that we can bring to play, technology, talent, in order to improve efficiency and productivity.
All right.
It is doable, and we're on the right path.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Patrick Akinwuta, the Academic Director of Global CEOs and Africa Program at Lagos Business School. Thank you so much, and we wish you the best in your summit.
Thank you very much.
All right, so that's the much we can take. Sunrise, guys, thank you so much for giving me a minute or two of your time. Back to the Sunrise Daily Studios.